January 15, 2026. A Venezuelan vessel, drifting in international waters. Suddenly, the crew starts bleeding from their ears. Their heads feel like they're splitting open. Some collapse. Others scream in agony. But here's the terrifying part: there were no bullets fired. No missiles launched. No visible weapons at all. What the crew didn't know: they had just become the first documented victims of the US Navy's most mysterious weapon system. A weapon so advanced, the Pentagon refuses to officially acknowledge it exists. This is the story of Operation Resolute Guardian. The story of how sonic technology turned the ocean into a battlefield where pain itself became a weapon. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this changes everything we thought we knew about modern naval warfare. Welcome back to Naval Tide. I'm your host, and today, we're diving deep into one of the most controversial military operations in recent history. Because what happened off the coast of Venezuela wasn't just another drug bust. It was a demonstration of power that sent shockwaves through every naval command center on the planet. But before we get into the operation itself, we need to understand the technology. Because sonic weapons aren't science fiction anymore. They're reality. And they're more terrifying than you could imagine. Let's start with the facts. On January 15, 2026, the U.S. Coast Guard, working alongside Navy assets, intercepted a Venezuelan-flagged vessel approximately 200 nautical miles north of the Venezuelan coast. The official story? A routine counter-narcotics operation. The reality? Anything but routine. According to the White House press secretary, who personally shared footage of the operation, the Venezuelan crew experienced what she described as severe physical distress during the interdiction. And here's where things get interesting. Multiple crew members reported identical symptoms: intense ear pain, nosebleeds, disorientation, and what several described as feeling like their skulls were vibrating from the inside out. One crew member told investigators it felt like standing inside a jet engine, but the sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The vessel was approximately 800 meters from the nearest US Navy ship when the symptoms began. Within minutes, the entire crew was incapacitated. No warning shots. No physical boarding. Just pain. Now, the Pentagon's official statement was carefully worded. They confirmed the interdiction. They confirmed the crew experienced distress. But when asked about the specific methods used, they cited operational security concerns and refused to elaborate. But we have sources. Former Navy personnel. Defense contractors. And acoustic weapons experts. And what they're telling us paints a very different picture than the official narrative. This wasn't just technology being used. This was technology being tested. In real-world conditions. On human targets. And the implications of that are staggering. To understand what happened to that Venezuelan crew, we need to talk about sound. Not the sound you hear in music or conversation. We're talking about sound as a weapon. Sound that can physically harm you. The human body is incredibly vulnerable to certain frequencies. Your inner ear? It's filled with fluid and tiny hair cells that detect vibrations. Expose those to the wrong frequency at high intensity, and you get immediate, excruciating pain. Your equilibrium fails. You become disoriented. In extreme cases, you can suffer permanent hearing damage or even brain trauma. But here's what makes modern sonic weapons so terrifying: they're directional. Unlike a loudspeaker that broadcasts sound in all directions, these systems can focus acoustic energy into a tight beam, almost like a laser. Except instead of light, it's sound. And instead of burning, it causes internal trauma. The technology is called LRAD, Long Range Acoustic Device. It's been publicly acknowledged by the military for years. Commercial versions are used for crowd control. The Navy uses them for ship-to-ship warnings. On paper, they're non-lethal deterrents. But what if I told you that's just the cover story? According to Dr. James Mitchell, a former acoustic weapons researcher who worked at the Naval Research Laboratory, the publicly acknowledged LRAD systems are, quote, kindergarten toys compared to what's actually deployed on modern warships. He explained to us that classified sonic weapon systems operate on principles far beyond simple acoustic projection. We're talking about phased array systems that can generate constructive interference patterns, creating zones of intense acoustic pressure at specific distances. We're talking about infrasound frequencies below human hearing that can cause physiological effects without the target even knowing they're under attack. And here's the kicker: these weapons leave almost no forensic evidence. No bullet casings. No explosive residue. Just trauma. Which makes them perfect for operations where plausible deniability is essential. The US Navy's interest in acoustic weapons isn't new. It goes back decades. But the technology has evolved rapidly, especially in the last 10 years. Let's start with what we know for certain. The Navy has publicly acknowledged deploying LRAD systems on warships since the early 2000s. These systems were initially designed for long-range hailing and warning. The idea was simple: communicate with vessels at distances where radio communication might be ignored or misunderstood. But military technology is never developed for just one purpose. And acoustic weapons are no exception. In 2015, the Office of Naval Research published a paper on non-lethal acoustic technologies for maritime security. It outlined research into acoustic systems capable of area denial through acoustic pressure generation. Translation? Creating zones of sound so painful that humans cannot physically remain in them. By 2020, defense contractors were advertising next-generation acoustic deterrence systems to the Navy. These weren't your grandfather's loudspeakers. We're talking about systems with multiple emitters that could create complex acoustic fields, adjust frequencies in real time, and operate in both audible and infrasound ranges. Then, in 2022, something interesting happened. The Navy's public discussions about acoustic weapons stopped. Research papers disappeared behind classification walls. Defense contractors stopped advertising these systems at public trade shows. Why? According to our sources, it's because the technology had matured. It had moved from research to operational deployment. And when weapons systems become operational, they become classified. Now, here's what we've been able to piece together from patent filings, budget documents, and interviews with former Navy personnel. Modern Navy sonic weapons likely use something called adaptive beamforming. This allows the system to track targets, compensate for ocean conditions, and maintain acoustic focus even as ships move. They can probably operate at multiple frequencies simultaneously, targeting different physiological effects. And most concerning, they can likely be deployed without the target ship even knowing they're under attack until symptoms begin. The Venezuelan incident suggests these systems are now mature enough for field deployment. And that raises some very serious questions. So why use this technology now? Why on a Venezuelan vessel? To answer that, we need to understand the bigger picture. Venezuela, under the Maduro regime, has become a major headache for U.S. interests in the Western Hemisphere. We're talking about a collapsed economy that's turned to narcotics trafficking as a survival mechanism. Venezuelan flagged vessels have been increasingly involved in cocaine and synthetic drug smuggling routes from South America to the United States. But it's more than just drugs. Venezuela has close ties with Russia, China, and Iran. Their ports have hosted Russian naval vessels. Chinese surveillance equipment is all over their infrastructure. And Iran has reportedly been using Venezuela as a backdoor to evade sanctions. From a U.S. strategic perspective, Venezuela represents a hostile actor in America's backyard. And the Trump administration has been clear about taking a harder line on both narcotics trafficking and hostile foreign influence in the region. So when that Venezuelan vessel was intercepted in January 2026, it wasn't just a drug bust. It was a message. A demonstration of capability. A warning. Think about it from the Navy's perspective. You have a technology that can incapacitate crews without firing a shot. No risk of escalation. No danger to boarding parties. No international incident from sinking a vessel or causing casualties. Just quick, clean incapacitation and capture. But here's the deeper strategic calculation: by demonstrating this capability publicly, or at least semi-publicly through controlled leaks and official acknowledgements, the Navy is sending a signal to every hostile actor in the maritime domain. Russia, watching from the Black Sea. China, monitoring the South China Sea. Iran, operating in the Persian Gulf. North Korea, with its coastal patrol boats. They're all asking the same question now: if the US Navy can do this to a Venezuelan drug runner, what can they do to our vessels? This is deterrence through demonstration. And it's a classic US military strategy. Show your adversaries what you can do in a low-stakes scenario, so they think twice before challenging you in a high-stakes one. But here's where things get uncomfortable. Because using sonic weapons on human targets raises some serious ethical and legal questions that we can't ignore. Let's start with the legal framework. The United Nations Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons restricts weapons that cause, quote, superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering. Sonic weapons, when used at high intensities, can cause permanent hearing damage, brain trauma, and severe psychological effects. Do they cross that line? The answer is complicated. Because unlike bullets or explosives, sonic weapons can be calibrated. They can be tuned to cause temporary discomfort or permanent injury. And that calibration is entirely in the hands of the operator. Which means accountability becomes murky. Then there's the question of proportionality. If you can incapacitate a crew without firing a shot, that sounds humane, right? But what if those crew members suffer permanent neurological damage? What if they develop chronic conditions from exposure? Is that more humane than traditional methods? Human rights organizations have already raised concerns. Amnesty International released a statement calling for transparency about the technologies used in the Venezuelan interdiction. They pointed out that sonic weapons, when deployed covertly, can constitute a form of torture under international law. And here's the thing that keeps military ethicists up at night: these weapons are invisible. A crew that's been hit with acoustic weapons might not even know what happened to them. They just know they're in pain. And from an intelligence perspective, that's terrifying, because it means hostile actors could use similar technologies without attribution. Imagine Chinese vessels using sonic weapons on Filipino fishermen in disputed waters. Or Russian ships targeting Ukrainian coastal operations. With no visible attack, no forensic evidence, just victims with mysterious symptoms, how do you prove what happened? How do you respond? The Venezuelan incident might have opened Pandora's box. And once that box is open, it's very hard to close. We reached out to multiple experts in naval warfare, acoustic weapons, and international law to get their take on what happened. And their responses were revealing. Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor of naval strategy at the Naval War College, told us, "What we're seeing is the Navy adapting to modern threat environments. Traditional kinetic weapons create escalation risks. Non-lethal or less lethal systems offer commanders more options. But the key word is accountability. These systems need oversight, training protocols, and clear rules of engagement." When we asked her if she thought the technology was used in Venezuela, she carefully replied, "I can't comment on specific operations. But I can tell you that the Navy has invested heavily in non-kinetic maritime interdiction capabilities. And when you invest that heavily, you eventually deploy." We also spoke with Commander James Reynolds, a retired Navy officer with 25 years of experience in maritime operations. His perspective was more blunt. Look, drug runners aren't going to file complaints with The Hague. They're criminals. So if the Navy has a tool that lets them shut down these operations without putting sailors at risk, of course they're going to use it. The question isn't whether they should, it's how to make sure it doesn't get abused. But perhaps the most concerning insight came from Dr. Michael Torres, a biomedical engineer who specializes in acoustic trauma. He reviewed the reported symptoms from the Venezuelan crew and said, those symptoms are consistent with exposure to high-intensity, low-frequency acoustic energy. The pattern of ear pain, nosebleeds, and disorientation suggests frequencies in the 50 to 500 Hz range at sound pressure levels exceeding 140 decibels. That's not a warning system. That's a weapon system. and exposure at those levels can cause permanent damage. News of the Venezuelan incident didn't just stay in the Western Hemisphere. It reverberated globally. And the responses tell us a lot about where naval warfare is heading. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a carefully worded statement expressing concern about reports of advanced weapon systems being used in maritime interdictions. They called for transparency and adherence to international norms. Translation? They're taking notes and probably accelerating their own sonic weapons programs. Russia was more direct. A spokesperson for their northern fleet made a pointed comment about, quote, experimental weapons being tested on civilian vessels, and suggested that such actions could provoke equivalent responses. That's diplomatic speak for, we're watching, and we can play this game too. Even allies were uncomfortable. A European Union maritime security official, speaking on background, told reporters, "We appreciate the U.S. commitment to counter narcotics operations, but we have questions about the methods." Accountability and transparency are essential in maritime law enforcement. But here's what's really happening behind the scenes. According to defense industry sources, inquiries about acoustic weapon systems from foreign militaries have surged since January. Countries are asking, can we get this technology? Can we develop our own? What are the rules? And that's creating a new arms race. Not in missiles or aircraft carriers, but in directed energy and acoustic weapons. India is reportedly advancing its sonic weapons research for coastal defense. South Korea has been testing acoustic systems for use against North Korean infiltration vessels. Even smaller nations are exploring these technologies because they're relatively affordable compared to traditional weapons systems. The genie is out of the bottle. And once one nation demonstrates a new capability, everyone else scrambles to match it. That's how arms races start. That's how technologies proliferate. But there's a darker possibility that keeps defense analysts worried. What happens when non-state actors get their hands on this technology? Terrorist organizations? Pirate groups? Criminal cartels? Acoustic weapons are based on physics and engineering, not exotic materials. The core components, speakers, amplifiers, power systems, are commercially available. What's classified is the integration, the software, the targeting systems. But how long before that knowledge spreads? We could be looking at a future where invisible weapons become commonplace in maritime conflicts. Where ships attack each other without firing a shot. Where crews suffer without knowing why. And where the laws of war struggle to keep up with the technology. So where does this leave us? What does the Venezuelan incident tell us about the future of naval warfare? First, it confirms what defense planners have been saying for years: the future of warfare is about options. Commanders want tools that give them escalation control. Sonic weapons offer that. They're force multipliers that can achieve objectives without the political costs of kinetic warfare. Second, it demonstrates that the U.S. Navy is willing to deploy experimental or newly operational systems in real-world scenarios. That's a significant shift. Traditionally, new weapons undergo years of testing before field deployment. But in an era of great power competition with China and Russia, the Navy can't afford to wait. They need to deploy capabilities as soon as they're viable. Third, it shows that the maritime domain is becoming a testing ground for next-generation technologies. We're not just talking about sonic weapons. We're talking about directed energy systems, electromagnetic weapons, autonomous systems, AI-driven targeting. The ocean is becoming a laboratory for warfare innovation. But here's what keeps me up at night. Once these technologies become normalized, once they're just another tool in the naval arsenal, what happens to the old rules? The laws of armed conflict were written in an era of bullets and bombs. They're struggling to adapt to drones and cyber attacks. Sonic weapons add another layer of complexity. How do you verify compliance with weapon restrictions when the weapon is invisible? How do you investigate alleged abuses when there's no physical evidence? How do you deter misuse when attribution is nearly impossible? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're challenges that militaries, lawmakers, and human rights organizations are grappling with right now. And for the US Navy specifically, the Venezuelan incident is both a success and a warning. It's a success because they achieved their objective, interdicting a suspect vessel without casualties or escalation. But it's a warning because they've now revealed a capability that adversaries will work to counter or replicate. The next time a US Navy ship faces off against a Chinese vessel in the Taiwan Strait, or a Russian submarine in the Atlantic, both sides might be carrying sonic weapons. And the question won't be whether to use them, but who uses them first. Welcome to the new era of naval warfare. It's quieter than you'd expect, but no less deadly. The Venezuelan incident isn't just a news story. It's a turning point. It's the moment when sonic weapons moved from science fiction to operational reality. And whether you think that's a triumph of American innovation or a dangerous precedent, one thing is certain: the world is watching. Here at Naval Tide, we'll keep investigating. We'll keep asking the hard questions. Because transparency and accountability matter, especially when it comes to technologies that can harm without a trace. If you want to stay informed about the latest developments in naval technology, warfare innovation, and maritime security, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. And here's my question for you. Do you think the US Navy was justified in using sonic weapons on the Venezuelan vessel? Or does this cross an ethical line that shouldn't be crossed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your perspectives help shape how we cover these stories. The future of warfare is being written right now. In the waters off Venezuela. In the Pacific. In research labs and command centers around the world. And we're here to make sure you understand what's really happening. This is Naval Tide. Stay informed. Stay critical. And we'll see you in the next one.